Welcome back to part 2 of a quick start guide to getting your practice online in light of COVID-19. So for this part, I've had a bunch of people send me their questions that they want answered as they're trying to make sense of the different kinds of tools that they can use to take their practice online. So for this section, I've invited Doug McLaughlin, who's my tech support, and I happen to be married to him, to help answer some of the questions and have a discussion. So we should say, though, that you're not a security expert.
No, I'm not. That's right. So, got a long history in IT and built my career there, but I'm not a security professional. So you need to, take a grain of salt with everything I say and certainly get your own advice if you feel that you need it.
Mm-hmm. But some familiarity with privacy requirements because you've done work for government.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And different jurisdictions as well. And you understand encryption and all those wonderful things and how to deal with risk.
Yeah,
a little
absolutely.
Bit. Yeah. So we're going to talk about that. So this is not replacing legal advice.
No,
obviously.
No.
You have to make your own decisions. We're not going to recommend any particular. I might mention what I use. People always ask me, and I'm happy to share that, but I'm not getting paid by anyone. I have no conflicts of interest. I'm not making money from anybody for any tech product. So let's get started.
Great.
So a lot of people, I hear this again and again and again, as long as the client gives you informed consent, it's okay to use any technology I want. And that's not true. If you want to use FaceTime or something that's really, there's no protection, it's not built for healthcare, clients will meet you in a coffee shop if you let them. They're not as worried about privacy in the way that we are. So it's still up to us to make sure that we have a safe environment for them to do therapy with us.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if you take a really broad view of technology, you wouldn't, a lock on a door is technology. You wouldn't leave your office unlocked.
No.
And you wouldn't choose a lock that wasn't secure, right? So it's the same thing with your technology. You want to make sure that you're using the appropriate technology for the job that you want to do.
Mm-hmm. So I usually, like in the workshops, the live workshops that I've done, really start basic with passwords, and they're important. I don't know if you want to add anything. People underestimate how important this is, but this is your lock on the front door.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely super important, right? You can Google some best practices around passwords. It's the longer the better. Use unique passwords. Use a password manager. There's lots of good ones out there. They're not that expensive. They'll sync between all your devices, your phone and your computer, etc. And you can keep a secure database of all your passwords. Really, that's a really important thing.
Use a different password for each
website,
each service.
I know it's hard and it's a pain, but it's really important.
Yeah. So really basic thing that we can all do, starting tomorrow, is make sure that your passwords are safe and secure, and there's a few guidelines up there, but you can Google more.
Yeah, other things there, you've got some good points, right? Two-factor authentication, or sometimes called multi-factor authentication, right? Where it's something you know and something you have, right? So quite often it will be an app on your phone, for example, and so you'll go to log into your system, and it will either send a code or an approval message to your phone that you have to enable. And that way, if someone does happen to either guess or get your password, if they don't have access to your device, then they're still not going to be able to get into your system. So those two things are really important. And then I would say, just in terms of passwords, again, longer is better. They don't have to be full of crazy characters, although some systems or software forces you to use.
It forces you, yeah.
Yeah, but really like a 3-word phrase separated by hyphens, that's not maybe nonsensical or not, not from a famous piece of literature or something, but just something that's easy for you to remember is a good way to go.
Yeah, great. Next, Wi-Fi. So don't use public Wi-Fi. Don't use Starbucks Wi-Fi. Don't use hotel Wi-Fi. A lot of people think because there's a password that they give you at the front desk, but everyone else in the hotel has that same password, so it's still public Wi-Fi and not secure, because people can see what you're doing.
Well, it's possible,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, there's all kinds of exploits on Wi-Fi, and it doesn't take someone that's that sophisticated. A teenager with the right tools and a bit of Googling can figure out how to hack a Wi-Fi network. And so it's important that you're on a trusted network, that you're either at work, for example, or at home, or as you have on the slide there, use a VPN or virtual private network. Which helps a lot. And if you are in a situation where you have to use one of those other networks, like a hotel network, for example, make sure you're doing it through a VPN, right? So it's kind of like a private tunnel, or a private connection on top of a
Because
public one.
when the teenager hacks into the Wi-Fi, they're not in your computer. They're seeing what you're transmitting, right?
They're seeing what you're transmitting, basically. Yeah, exactly, right? And it depends. There are ways to gain access to your machine if you are on an unsecured network. So again,
and they get a password, they see you type something in, or
yeah.
The other thing I found with VPNs, I'm blanking on the one I use. It has not worked well with some video.
There's a lot of overhead on VPN software, right? So because it's adding an extra layer of encryption and it's going through typically a predetermined set of servers, it has to. You're going to see some performance degradation,
or like just not working at all.
Yeah.
So I've had to not use that. So I just have to rely on the security of my Wi-Fi. So, the other thing, like watch for spoof Wi-Fi. So sometimes sneaky people will make it look like they'll name their Wi-Fi.
You want to make sure that you're on a network that you trust, and that don't make sure that it's not one letter off or something like that. Right?
Yeah. Be careful.
The best thing is to set up your networks, and then have your computer just automatically connect back to them.
Mm-hmm. What I've also done, like if I'm traveling and I need to access, I have a iPad that I do a lot of my work on, so I put a SIM card in that. So I use cell data instead. If I don't have a trusted network on the go.
Yeah, and that's super convenient right now. Not every iPad and not a lot of laptops have that ability, but there are some iPads for sure, and I'm sure there's Android tablets. Some laptops, like some of the ThinkPads, for example, will take a SIM card and can have data. You need to make sure that you've got a data plan that supports that, and that you have enough data. And video does tend to take a fair amount of data. Video calling is not that bandwidth intensive. It's typically less bandwidth than watching like a high definition video on YouTube or something, because of the compression that's used.
And a lot of companies right now are saying they're lifting data restrictions for people working at home, but I don't think that's for your cell phone. I think that's
you need
just
to
for
check
the
with your
computer.
cell
So
phone
double
provider.
check.
Yeah.
Don't just assume that okay, everybody, they're being nice and lifting all these data restrictions. Especially here in Canada, we pay a lot. for data.
We're one of the most expensive in the world for cell data, for sure.
So you probably have to be connected to the wall. I'm guessing it's your home or work.
Yeah, exactly. For voice or web conferencing over for voice conferencing, I wouldn't hesitate to use cell data. For video, you might want to try a couple calls and see what it does. Go look at your data utilization on your cell provider's site and see how much it actually consumed. The other thing is, if you are going to use something like a laptop with that, you need to make sure that you're not also running a bunch of other things that consume a ton of data, right? So that for example, backup software and that kind of thing could just be, sending a bunch of data in the background. So you want to be careful that, you're not using more data than you intend.
Mm-hmm. Also, make sure your home Wi-Fi is secure. So you need a password on your router.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Make sure you've got, and they're, I think they're all pretty much set up that way these days. If you have one that's provided by your provider, which most people do these days, then it should already be set up with a password.
Don't use an old, outdated router either.
Yeah, and if you have an older one, make sure the firmware is updated.
So routers have firmware.
They do.
Know that
it's
people
just
know that.
a router is just a little computer, a little special purpose computer. So firmware is just embedded software, basically. Yeah.
And then fake cell towers. People can set them up. Well, the RCMP can use that. And
Yeah, I'm not sure, what you can do about this.
I mean, if somebody wants to listen in on your session, they're going to listen in on your session.
Yeah,
right?
this is in the sort of espionage, category, I guess I'd say, right? So if this is happening, you probably don't have a lot of recourse. I would say this is not something to worry about in general, right? Chances are, if this is happening, it's probably law enforcement, and this. I'm not an expert on this. I don't even think this is legal based on my understanding, and they're not.
Yeah, there was something in the news a few years ago. I remember when I added this in, there was a news story about it. Now I kind of forget what happened, but there were a few people.
Yeah, I think now if they want to use these kinds
it.
of devices, they need warrants, and they need a specific reason, where in the past were some cases where law enforcement was just standing these things up without justice knowing about it.
Okay. Maintenance of your computer and devices. So making sure that you have an antivirus software. Do you need to do that for Apple products, though?
That's not really. No, I mean, there's malware, and you could should probably check for malware. I've never run antivirus on my Macs, and it's never seemed to be a problem.
But definitely for PCs.
Yeah, for PCs, and Windows has a built-in software. I think it's called Defender, and it should be installed by default, I think. And it's pretty good from what I understand.
But then you have to have updated browsers and operating systems as well.
Yeah, most browsers update themselves these days. If you're running Chrome, for example.
But if you leave your computer off for a while and Chrome's too many updates behind, you have to push it, apparently.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah,
so you just want to double check that your software is up to date. A perfect situation would be sort of a brand new or a dedicated device that you keep clean, but that's expensive for most people, right?
Yeah.
But get as close to that as you can, right? So if you don't have a bunch of extra software, I wouldn't recommend using a device that's like a family computer, for example, where a bunch of people are using it. And if you have to have a shared computer for doing work on, make sure you've got your own account set up that no one else in the family has access to, and that you're only running the software on that account that you need.
And then disk encryption, that's automatic on a Mac.
I'm pretty sure it's automatic.
I know we sound like we work for Apple.
Yeah, but this can be done on Windows machines too, and it may well be automatic now. I don't know. I would double check, but this is just to make sure that as data is written to the hard disk, it's encrypted, right? It's encoded so that if someone was to even pull the hard disk out of the machine, that they couldn't read the data.
Right.
And these days, I mean, a lot of especially newer computers, the disks aren't even disks anymore. They're just they're chips, basically, right?
Oh, okay.
SSD. So some of them can't even be pulled out really very easily. It's not a separate device. It's actually welded right into the. So
we talked a little bit about the router already, but the point about securely wiping your drive before selling. I mean, is with now chips, is that kind of outdated advice?
No, it's still good advice, right? I mean, the data still gets stored and persists on there, right? If you were going to sell a device, there are some people that actually make a point of not selling devices that were used for work because they're even if data is erased, it's not 100% gone, and there's special software you can get to sort of scrub the data off of there. But it depends on your level of
which is good news too. If you your computer crashes and you want to get something off, there is. You can pay a lot of money depending on how much you want.
It's not really a great strategy.
You want to get the data
sometimes
off.
You can.
Better to have backups.
You can send it to a place. I think like Drive Savers or something like that, where they can quite often recover a lot of the data on your machine. But better that you have a good backup strategy.
Yeah.
That you're doing
and I kind of prefer just to have my data in a practice management software, so it's in the
exactly.
cloud.
Then
so it's not on my actual device anyway. So it's one less thing to panic about if my computer gets stolen. Yeah.
But I think the main things here are, keep things up to date, run your system software updates because that's where security patches are applied. Keep as little sort of discretionary software on your machine as possible. Don't go downloading things from untrusted sources. Use the app stores from, Microsoft or Apple, for example. Those are good places to get your software. Try to stay away from sort of, software downloaded from, just random websites.
Yeah. Okay. Physical safety with your computer. So make sure your devices are locked and password protected. Don't leave your devices unattended. So you might want to even lock your laptop up in a file cabinet.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, again, these are also valuable, so just, treat them that way, but more so than the value of the machine is the value of the data that may be on it. So you want to be mindful of that and make sure that you take good, secure practices. Early in my career, when laptops were still relatively rare, I worked on a project where we gave laptops to a large number of staff, and they would even just put them in the trunk of their car and then go about their business for the afternoon, and they'd come back and they'd know that their car had been broken into and someone had crowbarred open the trunk because they saw them drop it in there. So you do have to be careful about where you leave things, and do your best effort to make sure that these devices are secure.
Yeah, I just carry them with me. I have a really nice backpack purse, so it's a little easier to haul that stuff around when I have to, because I prefer not to leave it in my car.
Well, most of these devices now, if you're carrying a laptop or a tablet, they're so light that they're easy to take around with you.
Yeah. Keep as little data as possible on the device. That's just a good privacy recommendation anyway. We're supposed to collect as little data as we need, but keep as little on the device. I deal with a lot of that by using practice management software.
Yeah, if you've got good cloud software that's got its own good, secure system, then that keeps a lot of the data off your device because it's stored on, in the cloud on their servers and has a security. So, you're right. As a general practice, only collect the data that you need, only keep it for as long as you need to. And if it's not on the device, then it's less vulnerable to be lost accidentally, or stolen, right? So if it's in the cloud, it's effectively backed up. If it's just sitting on your hard drive, if you've got a bunch of Word documents with, patient notes, for example, on your hard drive, and the hard drive crashes or the machine gets stolen or lost, then, you're out of luck.
Data removal apps.
Yeah, so there is software that will sort of scrub your hard drive and sort of make sure that it's a secure erase, right?
Yeah.
So that's not a bad idea if you especially like you said, if you're going to get rid of or recycle a machine, then that's a good practice.
Okay, and then covering the camera. I know, like, there's stickies on all the cameras in our house when they're not in use. I know you love that.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I think it's and even some of the laptops now have little covers on the camera, or even a switch now that you can physically disable the camera. It's not a bad practice, I think, to have that there. And certainly if you're especially if you have something like a desktop that's always on and it's in a room like a bedroom or something, then for sure, have the camera covered when you're not using it.
Yeah, I just think like the Mr. Robot series when he was like stalking his therapist. He was watching her. So like I put my stickies on. And then if there's anything really important and you want to make sure that it doesn't get lost and you're concerned about, you want to leave it on your hard drive. The other thing you do is put a printout in a safe, like of any important passwords or anything really.
Anything like a legal document, obviously, the your will or a contract that is really important. You'd want to have, that as a paper copy and stored somewhere, right? It's hard because more and more like digital documents, are legal. Digital signatures are legal, but it's hard copy can still be a good way to back things up. I hate paper, but sometimes it's the right thing to do. It's the
best, yeah. Or like a safety deposit box.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Then next, this is social engineering is a way that a lot of people get information from you. So like the best way to get into your accounts is to call and ask questions.
Yeah, this is actually the most common way of getting, quote unquote hacked, right? Is actually just by someone, for example, pretending to be from your company's tech support department or that kind of thing.
Or even surveys. They pretend to be a survey for something else, and they ask you all these questions, and then they can guess your passwords based on some of the answers.
They'll do anything they can think of, right? And so it's good to sort of just be suspicious by default, right? I know we want to trust people, but when it comes to information security, it's good to sort of be a little bit pessimistic, I guess, and think about, just if you have any sense that things might not be quite right, then be careful.
Yeah. And they do all kinds of things, from like cloning websites. So like there's one letter off. And
in
then
the URL,
looks,
absolutely.
Yeah, and it looks like the real deal, and it's very easy to create a fake caller ID.
Oh yeah. It's quite easy to spoof that, right? So you want to be super careful.
Actually, I can do that in like 2 minutes. Even I know how to do that one. So yeah, that's an easy one. And you might not be covered by your insurance. So I know some liability insurance companies now have cybersecurity protection. So check your liability insurance and make sure you're covered. But this is one of the most important things.
Yeah.
The non-technical ways to get into all of your.
And one of the things I always tell people is, if you're not sure that you're speaking to someone who you think you're speaking to, or they might be misrepresenting themselves, call them back or contact them on an alternate channel, right? So rather than, if they call you, get a number and call them back, and make sure it's a number that you can research. Or if they've emailed you, then text them back, right? So if it's someone, if it's an email from your accountant and it looks fishy, first of all, you can check the sending address, but if they were hacked, we had a client a couple of years ago who was hacked, and somebody did gain access to their system, and was able to email as one person inside the company to another and request a fund transfer, and luckily they
that's happening a lot these days.
It is, and you have to be so careful, right?
So if you have a bigger practice too, and you have lots of clinicians, so for those of you who own group practices, have lots of contracts, that's something to watch.
Just check, right? Like if you get an email, pick up the phone or reach out to the person on another channel to make sure that that it's legit.
Yeah, I mentioned in the first part that I had a client once who the ex-husband contacted me like over email asking for some information, pretending to be her, and it just didn't sound like her. So that tweaked me, and I called her, and she's like, "No."
It's crazy the number of spouses. I hope this is changing, but that used to anyway share email accounts know each other's passwords, right? And then if things go south, it's not cool.
It's very not cool. Okay, so. Not to scare you or anything, but you gotta be suspicious.
Yeah.
So this is one website by the government of Canada. You don't have to be Canadian. There's lots of good information on there. It's put together to help businesses keep their data safe. It's a really excellent resource. I just checked it out again. I've been recommending it for years. I just checked it to make sure that the link was still good, and it's actually even better. It looks awesome. So this is a really good thing to sort of bookmark and go through. And you can go through little bit by little bit. You don't have to do it, like I mentioned before, you don't have to do it all at once. You can, pick a project, pick a thing a day to do to improve your security, or one thing a week.
Yeah, it's like anything that's a big project, right? Like even just spring cleaning, you're not going to get it all done in one day, right? You can pick a room at a time, or whatever, and just check things off one at a time. It's going to take time to get through everything on a list like this, especially if a lot of this stuff is new to you.
Well, and like cleaning, it never ends.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you always have to
stay
stay up to date.
Beginning,
yeah. So get CyberSafe. Really, really great resource. So now we're getting on to the part where everybody asks me, what software should I use? What should I use for video conferencing? And there's a lot of good products out there. But instead of just giving you a list, because it changes, right? I'll use one thing and then I'm not so happy with it later, or it gets bought by another company, or maybe they don't change their privacy policies quite as often as Facebook, but something changes that I might not be cool with. So what I like at one time, I might not like later.
Yeah, I think you're going to find that that's going to settle out, right? This is still a relatively new market, right? So, web-based video conferencing software and collaboration is a reasonably new market, but it is starting to settle out a little bit. And like a lot of things in the internet, large players are, have emerged and, are locking up this space. And as much as I like to give small businesses a chance, and there's a time and a place for that, especially in this kind of environment, and especially if you're not someone that's an expert, I would skew towards larger, trusted organizations.
Rather than startups or smaller companies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is a lot, actually. Well, and I had a failed startup. So, we learned, but we hired another company, a Canadian company called MedStack, that did all the HIPAA compliance and FIPA compliance for us.
Sure.
And, but it cost a lot of money, but it saved us having that whole department managing all of this, because it is a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, now I think that's growing for some smaller companies. A lot of them are using companies like MedStack for their servers and their data encryption. But unless you know to look for things like that, then it's harder to evaluate. But a lot of startups also go under as well, and
or get acquired or what have you.
Or just their policies. Like I got burned by one, and because I signed a contract for a year thinking, oh well, video service, that's kind of a no-brainer. It's not that hard to put together, because I did for the app I was working on, so I had a little bit of maybe confidence that it'd be okay, but it was really kind of glitchy and I didn't really love it. And they're holding me to the contract for the year.
Well,
where I don't think Microsoft would do that.
No, exactly. And when an enterprise goes looking for software, it's not uncommon for them to spend 6 or 7 figures doing a needs assessment and finding the right piece of software for their needs. Now, of course, that's not something that a small business or individual practitioner can do.
Well, a few people out there have bigger practices.
Sure, but you can treat it with the same level of seriousness, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the thinking is, that you're going to be making a big investment, not only in the cost of whatever software you're buying or
disruption to your business.
Well, right, but even just the time you're going to take to learn it and integrate it into your business, all of those things take time and effort. So, treat these things seriously, right? Don't just it's not like personal software or an app on your phone where you just download something and try it, and if you don't like it, you take it off your phone.
It's a big decision.
It's a big decision. There's a lot to think about when you're looking at using software to run your business on.
And even though I love technology, I hate learning new software.
Yeah, and even
Doug knows.
and even if you do, right? Like I love learning new software, but still, like to learn something is one thing. To integrate it into your business is a whole other thing.
It's an investment.
And convince the other people in your company that it's worth using and that it's a good thing, and that it's even if it is a good thing.
Especially clinicians, you change the practice management software or the video software, and you have other clinicians in your practice too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then it's not the right thing. Then you get a lot of complaints. So, there's a bit of change management that goes along with it too. So let's get into how you evaluate software. So larger organizations do something called a privacy impact assessment. And if you've taken some of my past workshops, because that's where I'm getting a lot of the questions from, or people who've taken this before, this is the process I teach. I had to do it when I worked to get some things approved when I worked for the hospitals. The process is pretty much the same whether you're in Ontario, Alberta, BC. Most institutions, sometimes you can even Google, Vancouver Coastal Health Privacy Assessment or Alberta Health Services Privacy Impact Assessment, and you can see what the form is that they have you fill out, which can give you a good idea of what you should be looking for too. They're usually a little bit more technical than this list I gave here. I gave kind of an abbreviated privacy impact assessment.
Right, but this is, the way I would think about this, and this isn't the only thing you think about when you're acquiring new software, but it's a critically important one, especially when you're dealing with sensitive data, right? So, but think to your own personal life, right? If you were just today deciding to use Facebook for the first time, and you knew now what you know about Facebook and some of their practices and missteps in the past, you might say, well, I have a need for keeping up with my friends and my family, but that second point right on this slide, who will see this information right away? Mm-hmm. That would start, alarm bells going off, right? So you want to start thinking about those kinds of things, like how could this go south? How is this information going to be used? So what's the company's privacy policy? So if you're using a practice management software, for example, any reputable one will have a good privacy policy that says, we don't share any of this information. We take steps
no
to
third
secure
party.
it.
Yeah, really
Exactly.
for healthcare, there should be no third party, no selling of information. I think most of the ones that I reviewed, just even in refreshing this, said that today.
Right.
All of their staff that work there, and this is what I learned going through the startup too, that we had to have all of our staff get trained so that we were HIPAA compliant. So they had to take an information and privacy training so that they were.
I've worked with companies who've done the same kind of thing, right? They've done sort of either privacy training or data security training or both for employees, and not just IT staff, really everybody.
And then we had to be careful about the computers, like where they were stored, like they couldn't be facing out a window or anywhere. Like we had to be really careful.
Yeah, I worked at one company,
a
long time ago where, someone just gained access to the floor, followed someone in behind a door, and grabbed, 4 or 5 laptops and walked out.
Yeah.
And they were gone in 5 minutes with, thousands of dollars of hardware and a bunch of corporate data.
So when you do this, either for an organization or for your own private practice, you want to kind of like what you're really doing with a privacy impact assessment is following the data. Who's going to see it at the, if it's a software or service company that you're using, which is like a subscription software, who at that company is going to see it? Do you even need it? Actually, like that's the first question, does this meet a need? Then what information, how is it going to be used? Where is it going to be shared? Where is it going to be stored? Transmission. So there's encrypted storage, but there's also like the sending of the data.
Yeah, that's right. When they talk about sort of, data security and encryption, they talk about data at rest and data in transit. And where data is stored, that's something to do with, a privacy impact assessment. When you talk about security in general, you also want to know, how is that data being transmitted from your computer to their computers, right? And make sure that it's encrypted. And pretty much every system these days is. But that's, you'd be looking for that sort of in the specs of the software.
Yeah. And then documentation of security compliance. So I think a lot of people get confused with HIPAA compliance or FIPA compliance. Like it's not an external certification. It's the company self-reporting that they are compliant with a particular piece of legislation.
Yeah, and most of those compliance, and again, I'm not an expert in this, but it seems to me most of it's procedural compliance rather than using particular technologies.
Because none of these, you were saying we were talking about this earlier while we were getting ready for this. There's really not a lot of tech specifications like, levels of encryption or, it's more that, except for HIPAA, it's like, we were saying like 192-bit encryption.
Well, the government in the U.S. used to be for years, I think 192-bit encryption. Now I think most everyone's using 256. And really it's just the higher the number, the more bits, the harder it is to crack the encryption. At that level, it's, there aren't computers today that have the ability to get through all the possibilities. The time scale is years, decades, hundreds of years to guess. The code to crack the encryption. So it's pretty darn secure.
I think people get intimidated by some of that when they're looking there too. So
yeah,
I think it's good to look for HIPAA compliance or FIPA compliance, whatever they say, because like they've done some self-assessment and then you can check. And if you have any questions, ask somebody who knows, technology a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's where you need to, you might need some external advice. Look at what your, other people in your industry are doing, what software they like, what they've had good results with. But if you have questions like that, then that's time to get some expert help.
And if you have a large organizations, you might even want to hire a consultant too. You can hire privacy consultants.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that come in and help you with these sorts of things. So there's a lot of them out there actually.
Yeah.
And then one of the things that the hospitals ask, what about passwords? Do you get so many tries before you're locked out? That's a question I know was on the hospital form I filled out. Is 2-factor authentication available? Data encryption, we talked about that. Yeah. Is the system located in a secure premise? I know there's one local company here that they have an armed guard on their servers, which I know the hospital really liked.
Yeah, I think most of these.
So they practice physical.
Yeah, data storage is becoming more and more like power generation in some ways. There's fewer and fewer places that are doing it. Maybe that's not quite the right way to characterize it, but companies like Microsoft and Amazon, Google, Rackspace, right? Like they're large companies with large data centers, and they have physical security, network security, redundancy on power, all the things that you'd expect of a large organization. It's very rare these days that you'd be buying or subscribing to a software where the data center is in somebody's building.
Yeah.
The data is somewhere. No one that's not in the data center business wants to be storing data.
But I know 15 years ago, I was asked to do a review of the practice management software platforms that were out there, and there weren't too many. And that was early days, and I was asked to see which ones I could recommend. I couldn't find one I would recommend. And this one guy I called, he's like, oh, I'll change this, I'll change that. And I asked about data storage, and he goes, oh yeah, the server's here in my house.
Yeah, not cool.
Yeah.
That's
yeah. So things have changed in 15 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now there's big fines for privacy breaches in the States, so they take it pretty serious if they're HIPAA compliant.
Yeah.
So, okay, and then I mentioned also about employees having training and confidentiality. That's a HIPAA compliance regulation now, that everyone who works at the software company or app company for a healthcare app that uses
that
personal
makes
health
sense,
information.
Right? It's a bit like the human engineering for security, right? Like or the social engineering,
Yeah.
right? It's often a weak point, so it makes sense to address it, right? Training is important.
Okay. So where do you find this info? A lot of different places. So all the different questions that are in the privacy impact assessment, this is where you can go to find out where, what kind of encryption or where the data is stored. So most of the software web pages or app pages will have a privacy policy on their site. So it's not just for the privacy of browsing the sales part of the website, it's for the use of the software as well, typically on most of them. And then they'll have a terms of use page. Sometimes there's information there. Sometimes there'll actually be a security page. I found some websites that buried it in their FAQs. Most of these websites now, because they want to get into hospitals and different institutions, are making it very easy for people to find that information now. Whereas I think 5 or 6 years ago, it was harder for me. I had to dig and I had to call. And now when I took a quick look today, I found everything that I would need to answer all my PIA questions if I worked at an institution, because they're getting used to that too.
Yeah, and as any industry matures, right, and online therapy and all these kinds of systems, it's not as early days anymore.
No, it's much easier to get that information, and even the sales guys will help you. I think they're getting, before when I talk with salespeople, they'd often have to get me someone technical to do that, but I think they're used to answering that question so often.
Oh, for sure.
From enterprise and institutional buyers that they just deal with that objection right away.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can also, but if you want to find things that might be wrong with it, that maybe the company isn't highlighting, look for reviews on Google. Look like.
It's a good place to start, right? You'll get a sense of things, right, and at least maybe you can narrow it down to sort of 3 candidates, and then again, depending on sort of your level of technical familiarity and whether people that are using the software and they've had good experiences, etc. A trusted advisor is always a good strategy on these things.
But you can find out a lot just by doing product name review, product name problems, product name.
In terms of what you're Googling.
Yeah, what you're Googling. You can find out a lot. And Reddit, there's a lot of groups that will talk about software. One I wish I'd known about before I got the app that I'm paying out for the year is getapp.com.
Yeah, they have good reviews, right? And they're sort of sort of crowdsourced reviews on all kinds of different software, right? So you can get a pretty good sense of the strengths and weaknesses of
Yeah,
software.
I felt like some of the positive apps didn't sound like actual people, so I felt like they were a bit planted.
Well, I
But
think that can be a problem on any review site,
Yeah.
right? It's quite often on the positive side, you have to sort of think about, are they paying their friends and family, or are they, is there some falsification of that? And on the negative side, you've got people with real problems, and then you've got people that are just pissed off for some reason.
So you can tell the difference between the people who have real problems and people who
it's pretty easy.
are just they're maybe a competitor planting a bad ad.
Yeah, or they
if they're
have one bad experience, or they didn't take the time
personality
to get
disorder,
trained.
right? And they go on and complain. So, but when I went on getapp.com for the one I didn't like, I saw the negative reviews really matched my experience. So you look for things that feel a little bit more real.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Yeah. And then there's trusted magazines and bloggers. I can't think of any magazines right now.
No, I mean, everything's on the web these days,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not sure what the sort of industry, if there's some trusted sources, for
Like the
industry.
Online Therapy Institute. Kate Anthony does that in the UK, but and you can actually take a certification through her as well to be an online therapist. Okay. But I used to write for Tilt magazine that Kate Anthony and Deanna Nagel put together. I used to do an article a month or a quarter. It was quarterly. The magazine that they put together, Tilt, is no longer, but they have the archives there. But Kate still blogs and trains people. Cool. So she's someone who's specifically working in online therapy and really understands a lot of the technology hiccups that therapists are going through. So that's a good resource as well. There's the Telehealth Institute, Marlene Mayhew's program. So she writes a lot, does a lot of training of therapists. I think she's a great resource as well. And signing up for her newsletter sort of keeps me on top of things. Yep. She's awesome. So, and now she actually also has a free course that she's using for people that are doing online therapy in light of COVID-19. Cool. So you can check that out. And then you can connect with a cybersecurity consultant. We've mentioned that already. And then kind of, I don't know, if you don't have to, I'd stay away from the smaller companies and startups. I want to support smaller businesses and help them grow, but I also want my business to go smoothly.
Yeah, I think as things become, smaller companies and startups are great for things that are sort of new and emerging, right? And but for your core systems, the things you're running your business on,
if it would be a real problem if they failed,
yeah.
If it's nice to have, you're trying something out, and I'm using a virtual reality system right now. It's from a startup, but if it dies, I'm okay. I'm not. Yeah,
it's not critical to your business.
I love it, though.
Right? Sure. Yeah. But if they did go away tomorrow, it would be inconvenient, but it wouldn't stop you from doing business. It wouldn't break me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm more willing to take a risk there than with something core to the business.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah. Okay, risk mitigation. So we've done our privacy impact. We've decided something's safe. So do you want to explain risk mitigation?
Well, yeah, sure. The idea is on any kind of project, right, there's risks, and they can be anything from sort of, the technical risks of the software or the technology you're putting in place. They can be risks like change management. Will users, will the people that are in my company use this software, and how much, will they actually use it the way it's intended? So really, this is really just, anything that sort of might keep you up at night, you should put on this list. Yeah. And then think about how probable is it, on a scale of 1 to 10 that this might happen. And if it did happen, what's the impact of it on a scale of 1 to 10, right? So if I have a practice management software, for example, and I've got all my business in there, and then I lose access to it, that would be a pretty high impact, right? Hopefully, if you've picked well, the probability of that happening would be pretty low. Now, the probability of maybe them having an internet outage for a couple of hours or the servers going down might not be that low. And then, what would that impact be, right? So you kind of want to look at that. And then the idea here is you can sort of multiply those two things together, and, something that has a probability of 2 and an impact of 10 gets a score of 20, 2 times 10 kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then once you have, let's say you came up with a risk or a list of 10 risks, look at the top 3 or 4 highest ones and see, what those are, and then make sure you've got some sort of plan to mitigate those. And
Yeah, because nothing is risk-free. Like, there's
Yeah.
nothing, so you can't be so afraid that you can't, like, there's risk even when people come into your office. Someone could plant a bug, or, you don't close the door completely, or I don't know, any crazy thing
absolutely.
can happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so we take a risk every day. So it's having a plan in place. So when I do the live groups, sometimes I'll break people up and I'll get them to do a privacy impact and risk mitigation assessment of different things. Like, I'll usually break people up into smaller groups. One of my favorite things to do for this exercise, we're not going to go through all of them, is to do a PIA and risk management assessment on a filing cabinet.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, exactly, right? So there's a piece
Not
of
just
technology
software, yeah.
that's only about 100 years old, and has benefits and risks just like any other piece of technology.
People can break into them. They can, be in the middle of a fire and everything inside catches on fire. I found out at one workshop that I did, someone told me, I didn't know this, if somebody sees the serial number on the lock, they can call the company or contact the company and say, oh, I lost my keys. Can you send me another one? And if they know the make and serial number, they can get another key sent out to them.
It's kind of scary. Hopefully they're...
So then you would never know.
Yeah, hopefully they're putting some better practices in place to track their customers. But
yeah, or you can. I've had one time I had a filing cabinet that I got from somebody else, and the key was lost, so I had a locksmith come in and change it.
Yeah.
So you could do that too. That's a little bit safer as well. But there's risk with anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, just because it's old and trusted, often we don't think about these things. We don't even think of a filing cabinet as really it's not really technology anymore.
Well, you don't think of it as technology,
Yeah.
but yeah, you're right. I mean, and look at if look at what's going on right now with COVID-19, right? If your workplace was quarantined, or you couldn't get to it, and you couldn't get to your filing cabinet, right?
Right.
So there's a risk right there, right? You've got a physical restriction to access there. So at least if the data's online, hopefully you have remote access, or you have web access to the system and the data.
Great. Okay. I got a lot of tech spec questions in the last few days, and I think we started to address some of that as we were talking on the other slides.
Yeah, tech specs are kind of tricky, right? Because they're used often to, a list full of, crazy, complicated terms looks impressive, and, marketing departments love to, have all their features and all their specs, and,
Or when I complained to that startup that I wasn't thrilled with, I got an email back from the guy who's just like tried to intimidate me with a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, dude, you don't know who you're talking to.
But again, it's, all this stuff is in service of what you're trying to achieve in your business, right? So, things like levels, if they give you, encryption, right? This is, AES 256-bit encryption. Well, what does that mean? Feel free to ask those questions, right?
Yeah.
And is this unique to you, or is this something everybody uses, right? Like, just ask some common sense questions, right? And the chances are with a lot of these things when it comes to specs, if they're doing it, chances are their competitors are as well.
Well, and I think people are frustrated too, because when they go to the legislation, which is the next slide, there's really no legislation that specifies what you need to have. What exact technology, but that's also because legislation often stands for years and years, and technology is always changing.
That's right.
So I don't think that's ever going to change. You're never going to get a government that builds into legislation, what specific technology you should be using.
Yeah, I think that's rare in my experience anyway, from what I've seen, right? The statements tend to be fairly broad or open to some interpretation, right? They'll say something like, used a trusted security protocol or something like that.
Yeah, I just went through the Ontario list, and it's just, like use good practices, keep it secure.
Exactly.
It's very, if you go through FIPA, the, for the collection and storage of electronic data, it's very kind of like, just make sure it's safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to know how to keep it safe and be able to, like a new word I learned today in updating the talk was cryptographically salted and hashed passwords.
Yeah, again,
that's intimidating kind of stuff.
It is. It's
right?
even intimidating to me, and I sort of know what it
means. Like, what is that, right?
Yeah, so, whenever I see stuff like that, it's like, why is that not in plain English, right?
Yeah.
And
They're trying to look impressive.
Yeah, they're trying to look impressive. There's no reason for language like that on a product page.
Yeah. Actually, one physician I worked with, he goes, Christine, like, we resort to jargon when we're feeling insecure and we want to look smart.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of industries too.
Yeah.
So maybe we do that a little bit too. Yeah, psychologists, we use a lot of jargon too. I don't know if you noticed that.
I've noticed that. Yeah. Although my industry's no better. So.
Yeah. So tech specs, I wouldn't worry so much about that. If you're really confused, ask the company for a plain English summary. But I did notice today, aside from like the password protection term of the day that I learned, they're much better at plain English.
I think most customers are demanding it, right? And again, a spec is meaningless if it doesn't have some value to your business, right? So, is this, does the software provide backups? Every software worth its, worth the money is going to have, a good backup plan, good data encryption, right? All those kinds of things. So just make sure that, everything on
they don't want to
get
in trouble. They don't want bad reviews. So they want to be in compliance and sell to organizations larger than your private practice.
Yeah, for sure.
So they want to have dot their I's and cross their T's. So legislation. I got so many legislation questions, and so I've got a lot of here that you're probably reading instead of listening to me. For Canadian federal guidelines, the legislation's PIPEDA. For American, it's HIPAA. BC and Nova Scotia appear to be the only Canadian provinces that require data stored in Canada. It can be transmitted, though.
I'm not sure if that's completely true. And again, I'm far from an expert in this area, but I know that that BC, where we live, there are some specific requirements around not only data residency, but that are quite strict. And there's been some recent legislative changes that you've got on there.
So you told me about Bill 35, and I found
section recently.
Bill 35, Section 22 of FIPA was like, BC was like, it was hard to use. Anyone who works in a hospital knows there was a lot of software we couldn't use in a BC hospital.
There's a lot of cloud-based software that it was off the table completely. Now the way has been cleared, but it's still early days. And
do you want to explain why that is?
Well,
so the data is stored in Canada. So even though Microsoft and Amazon, they have Canadian servers.
Yeah, they have data centers in Canada, but there was some, I'll just say, sort of edge cases around when some data or metadata, data about data might travel outside of the country that those governments weren't comfortable with. And pretty much every other government in the world was, including, places like Switzerland that, take security extremely seriously. So, but I think the main thing here is just, this stuff can be complicated. If you need, again, advice, make sure that, you check with legal counsel if you do have questions or concerns. But again, if you've got, if you're dealing with an organization, a software provider, especially larger ones, you can ask some of these questions and start there, and they'll quite often have good information on their website about a lot of this information. That's really a good place to start.
I don't know if you, like most of us therapists, we are familiar with these pieces of legislation. We've had to write jurisprudence exams and study these. So we actually, do like to go to the codes and read them for ourselves. But it's a lot more vague than you think. It's like protect the data, keep it safe, don't share.
Yes.
And it won't give you a lot of guidance about the technology. Here in BC, there's been this concern. Mostly, like if you're working in an institution, they do the thinking for you. Like if you work in a hospital, you're not releasing the information to anybody. They have to go through medical records. But if you are doing contract work, like if you're doing work for ICBC or WorkSafe or the old WCB, you're doing, or for the any ministry you're doing work for them, you should check with them to see what their institutional privacy requirements are and be in alignment with them. In BC, absolutely. We have legislation for private organizations versus public organizations, and they do differ differ a little bit. We have a bit more leeway when it's a private organization. I don't think you have to worry about the data being in the States so much.
No, I mean, the main thing is, whenever you're working, with other organizations, when we work with clients, we always have a conversation around privacy to understand what their requirements are, if there's any expectations of us as a service provider, how we behave and how we access and store and manage data on their behalf. And we have had clients that have said, any documents you write, for example, we want guarantees that those documents have been secured and are stored in Canada, for example. Or it's quite often, if it's a government client, they'll want those documents actually authored and stored on their systems, not ours.
Right.
So those types of things are certainly, things you need to think
there's
about.
one piece of software when I was working at the hospital here that was American software, but they installed it on the Vancouver Coastal Health servers.
For sure.
Their own copy.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on for legislation. It's just keep it safe.
Keep it safe.
Be up to date on it. If you ever get a complaint, show that you've read it.
Yeah.
And that you understand. If you really have questions, talk to a lawyer.
Yeah, your lawyer's your friend here.
Yeah. Lawyers are great. Love lawyers. Okay, liability insurance. So this is another, I've got quite a few questions about liability insurance, and a lot of us who are psychologists, we have insurance through BMS. They have a cybersecurity thing. I would say call them. Just tell them exactly what you're doing and how you're using it, and then they will tell you if you're covered. I think when I told them some of the stuff I was doing, they upped my coverage a bit, so I ended up paying a little bit more. You can also get riders and extra things put in place. The other thing that you have to make sure is that you stay in line with what you're covered with. So make sure your practice is in scope and the limits of competence. Most of them do cover you, though, now for doing online therapy.
Yeah, and I think
more and more therapists are doing
this
that.
This is just good advice, right? Whenever you make any kind of significant change to your business, no matter what your business is, you should be thinking about how does this affect my accounting, my legal, my insurance, my technology situation, right?
Yeah.
And so this is just something you should constantly be reevaluating. And so if you're adding new software or new process into your business, right? So then this is something that you should be having a conversation with your insurance agent about.
Yep. Practice in your jurisdiction too. There is some Trump announced, I don't know how quickly this went in place for American psychologists, that he was going to see if telehealth, like people could practice outside of jurisdiction so they could help other people in other states.
Oh,
if anyone American is. So I don't know if that applies to psychologists either. I might follow the Telebehavioral Health Institute, Marlene Mayhew's program. I'm sure she'll have more information on that.
Yeah, this is, I think, probably a difficult line to walk, right? Especially, where right now people want to, sort of be very trusting and go over and above and help. And I think that's a good instinct. But you do want to sort of be a little bit careful because, your actions today could have long-standing implications. And when everything's settled down, if somebody feels that, they were not treated properly or handled properly, then that stuff can come back to bite you, right? Both from a legal or insurance, perspective.
Yeah, and I think even if it gets past that you can work outside of jurisdiction, during this crisis, I would still check with my insurance. The states might be cool, but your insurance might not be.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, you said, there's, I think you were saying there's places like, the territories or Yukon.
Yeah, Yukon, where, there's no psychologist.
But what do the local colleges have to say about that? Do they care, for example, right? Or do they have
There's no one to complain to, actually. No,
Interesting.
Yeah. So, you can. Actually, I talked to a lawyer about that.
Okay.
Yeah, he's like, oh yeah, go ahead. I'm like, yeah, well, there's other reasons. I talked about the other reasons why I'm not right now. And then there's good resources too. If you think that there's going to be any potential complaint, a lot of insurance policies require, this isn't optional, they require to call you if you think there's the potential for a complaint. So there doesn't even have to be a complaint yet. So you can call them, and they are very helpful typically, and they will connect you often with a lawyer. Sometimes they have a legal line that you can call. Other times they'll set up an account so that you can contract a lawyer.
So are you saying I don't know, you have a session that doesn't go well for some reason,
Yeah.
and you think that the client might complain, that you should be proactive?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So you have to be proactive, actually. Not everybody realizes that, but yeah, you do.
Okay.
It's typically built into that.
Interesting.
So, yeah. They want to catch it early. They want to get ahead of it. So, okay. Privacy breaches. These feel bad, but they happen even if you do everything right. It can happen.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, things like this, it's unfortunate, but it's just, it's a bit like, like hard disk crashes with computers, right? Like eventually it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. You get a laptop stolen. You send an email to the wrong person.
Yeah, exactly, right? How everyone's done that, right? You've sent an email or a text to the wrong person.
And you just feel sick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when that happens, if you are in private practice, you can call the state or provincial privacy officer. If you're working in an institution, typically you might tell your manager or director, but there's typically a risk management department, and they'll guide you through. There's a form you usually fill out internally. And you might also want to contact your liability insurance in case there's a potential for a complaint. You will feel lousy, but this usually the people, especially like privacy officers, risk managers, this is what they do every day. So they're kind of desensitized to this.
Yeah.
They're pretty sympathetic. You will get a lot of guidance. I've talked to different people who've been through this process. They've said it's always been supportive and not punitive. You might get the odd jerk. I don't know everybody. I've talked to a lot of people, though, who said that, it's really been supportive, and you get guidance on how to notify clients and when, and how to do a bit of detective work to see, which clients even you might want to contact. Maybe not everybody, depending on what was stolen or where the breach was. And then the final part of the process is to develop a plan to prevent this happening from the future.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important. We've had a couple of these types of incidents throughout the years. It's pretty rare, thankfully, but those are the main things that are really important, right? It's important to basically, as much as you can, get out in front of it, but also then just be completely transparent about, this is what happened, this was the impact, and this is what we're doing to make sure it doesn't happen again.
And, you might be surprised, like going through the privacy officer or risk doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go through a complaint with your regulatory body. Sometimes patients are very understanding and go, it happens, right? And so the people that I've talked to who've been through this process have also been very surprised about this, how understanding and sympathetic people can be, even if, fairly sensitive information could have been breached. So no need to panic when it happens. Well, you will. I don't know. It's hard
but you're
not
right.
to.
It's kind of hard not to. It feels terrible, but you just have to, get through it. And like you said, it will be okay.
Yeah. Okay. Another question I got. What's the difference between business associate agreements, information management agreements, and information sharing agreements?
Okay, I'm just out on this slide completely. I don't know anything about any of this, so this is all you.
Okay, so BAAs, from what I can read, are just a HIPAA requirement. It's just the name for the agreement that you have with the software provider or service provider, and essentially it outlines each of your what are their responsibilities, what are your responsibilities, and any notifications of breaches that they'll tell you. So, for example, a lot of people have been asking me about the difference for the different kinds of Zoom accounts that you can have. You can get a professional account, and you can get a Zoom for Healthcare account. Here in Canada, we don't really need BAAs because we don't have the HIPAA requirement for that that they have in the States.
Okay.
But I did get the healthcare one because I just think if there's a complaint and somebody, is deciding my case at the college and they don't really understand technology and they go, well, why didn't you use the healthcare account?
I was trying to save a few bucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It doesn't look
no.
great.
And but if you pay the American, like it's $200 a month per account, but you can get a BAA in Canada for much less because we don't have the HIPAA fines.
Sure.
So call the salesperson. Like if you want to use Zoom, call the salesperson directly, although their lines are probably really busy right now. It may take a bit to get in, but Canadians can get a better deal if they call
Yeah.
Zoom directly. They don't post it on the website, but just simply because we don't have those big HIPAA fines. But I did because I just, apparently from what I understand, and you can confirm this with Zoom, there's no difference security-wise. Like, it's the exact same platform for the professional account versus the HIPAA account, but you're paying for HIPAA's.
It's almost like insurance, basically.
It's like insurance
Yeah.
for the fines that they have in the States. But in Canada, it's not that big a price difference. So I just bit the bullet and set up the healthcare account to be extra.
Right.
An
Okay.
abundance of caution,
Yeah.
which is a phrase that's getting thrown around. An information management agreement is just a BAA is a kind of information management agreement. So even if you're working with a Canadian contract, they're going to have an IMA instead of maybe a B, although sometimes they call it a BAA anyway, because that term gets thrown around. So therapists are sort of hearing BAA everywhere, and that it's a requirement for HIPAA. So it's just the agreement that you have with the software company.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then information sharing agreements, from my research, and I could be wrong about this, this is like for public organizations in BC. So this is from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. And it just talks about, for public companies, what personal information do you have the authority to share? So like for continuity of care, like from one department in the healthcare region to another, or between ministries, or...
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know, we deal with, some large agencies that have to provide, reporting out to government ministries, for example. So they must have some sort of sharing agreement that says, we'll share, I don't know, the number of visits that we receive from, people seeking services or that type of thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And then a lot of the things that you sign up for, like if you sign up for practice management software like Jane or Clinico or any one of those, or for assessment, there's one called GreenSpace. Any kind of software service company, they post their terms of use and privacy policies on their website, and that's considered a contract too.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
So
yeah.
lawyers go through with those companies and they put down, all the requirements. So we often just kind of scroll through them, but actually read them, right? Because that's your agreement. If you're using that software, that's your agreement with the company.
These are the things that, on consumer software, people just scroll by and hit the button, right? And when it's business software, you shouldn't really do that ever anyway, but, we're all human. But when it's business software, for sure, you should be actually reading those terms of use, running them past your attorney if you have questions, and make sure that there's nothing in there that, doesn't sit well with you.
Right. Okay. Your technology team. So we kind of talked about this as we went through. We're getting to the end of the tech session here. Have your lawyer.
Yeah, this is all about trusted advisors, right?
I love my lawyer.
Yeah.
I ask all kinds of questions. If I build something new, I will definitely get her to draw up my terms of use and privacy policies. Have a good technology and consultant. You don't have to marry them.
No, you don't have to marry them, but you might have to pay for them then.
Yep. And then, but you know what? Even for the app or the product, the help desk can be very helpful.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that's part of the reason they're there, right?
And that's part of what you want to look for when you're using a new piece of software. So if you're testing out a new piece of software and you're in a trial period, or use it and actually call the help desk and see how good they are.
Well, yeah, you have to remember, I mean, one of the main reasons that help desks exist for these companies is it's a customer retention strategy, right? So they want people to be able to use their software and be effective because they want them to stay around and keep paying for it. So use that, right? It's there for that exact reason. So make sure that if you have questions, and they don't have to just be technical questions, it can be business questions or questions about sort of, really anything to do around the software, by all means reach out to the help desk or the customer service department at your provider. One
time for fun, you and I were looking up on LinkedIn who worked for a particular software company that's sort of a new startup, and we found that on LinkedIn anyway, all the people that said that they worked for this practice management company, half of them were in the customer service
Yeah,
There's half development and half customer service. It's like they're equal parts.
Oh yeah,
And I think
for
that's
sure.
pretty typical.
Yeah, it is. It's a super important role, right? And especially like a lot of the software, some of it is, most of it nowadays, they try really hard to make it user friendly and easy to use. But under the covers, there's lots going on. There's all kinds of different, things that it needs to support. So it can be complex, and so they need good software support, right? So good documentation, a good a good help desk that you can either call, email, post messages to, all those things.
Yeah. And then good information in plain English.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's really important. Your liability insurer actually has a lot of support as well. So if you have some questions, that's you can call and get access to have your questions answered. Your local privacy office. I've called the BC Privacy Commissioner more than once and gotten really great helpful information when I was thinking about buying or subscribing to a practice management platform, and I was tracking down where it was and could I use it, and they spent hours on the phone with me. I don't know how busy they are lately, but at the time I think he was
they might be pretty busy.
I got someone who was very chatty.
The last thing on this slide is the community and your peer group is another sort of extension of your technology team, right? Talk to your peers. A lot of there's all sorts of online forums that are probably in around your profession. There's quite often for larger and even not so large software, there'll be the company might stand up a forum and encourage collaboration or communication between their customers.
Or start your own group.
Or quite often you'll see, independent forums for large software, especially. So it's another place where you can post questions and get help from the community.
And then the regulatory bodies, often your colleges, may also have a practice support line depending on where you are. We have that in BC too. Cool. I don't know how technical they might be, but they might be able to get you some help. So just wrapping up the middle section. That was longer than I thought it was going to be.
I guess we had a lot to say. To turn this into a course, it's a lot of information.
It's a lot of information, but this is kind of what you need to hit the ground running. So I hope you didn't listen to it all in one sitting.
Well, and again, it's back to that sort of, spring cleaning analogy, right? It is a lot, and you need to make a plan to get to every room of your house, but you don't have to do it all in one weekend.
Yeah. So just to cover up, to wrap it up here for this part 2, no tech is good or bad. It's all in how you use it.
Yeah, I think that's generally true, right? And it's like anything. You can use or misuse anything, and it's really about just understanding sort of what the pros and cons are and what the sort of what the implications are.
And stay on top of it. Do audits and updates. Get your team together. You don't have to do it alone. If you go on social media, I have here stick to public education and advocacy. So watch your online presence. Stay suspicious of.
Yeah, exactly. What's the saying? Trust but verify. Right?
Trust but verify. Yeah. Think risk management. You can't avoid risk entirely, but it's there's a lot you can do to mitigate it. And if it does happen that there's a breach, it's not the end of the world. That you will get help getting on top of it. And you can't beat it, so join it. Now a lot of people are diving into this because they have to. They're going to have to self-isolate at home or get told to stay home.
Yeah.
And so we all have to kind of do our part, and people are going to be stressed, and they need us to figure this out so that we can be there for them.
Yeah,
online.
It's challenging, and especially if this is new to you, it's a lot, like we said, to take in. We're lucky in our industry. We were early adopters on remote software.
You mean
remote,
IT industry?
Remote work. Well, the IT industry in general,
yeah.
and then my company is specifically, right. We were early to encourage work from home and remote work. So thankfully, we're in a good place, and we're helping some of our clients as well with some of their questions around how to be more effective and how to use some of these tools to collaborate and meet and work remotely.
Mm-hmm. So don't be intimidated. Just take it bit by bit. And, I think now, even compared to 3 or 4 years ago, I think it's much easier to find safer software to use. There's more and more
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was thinking just earlier today, if this pandemic had hit 5 years ago,
It'd be very
it
different.
would be very different. We wouldn't
Yeah.
even be having these conversations,
No.
right?
Yeah. So, slow down your breathing. It's all good. You can do it. And there's lots of great resources out there to help you get up to speed. And it's
Yeah,
actually kind
absolutely.
of fun. I kind of like it. So I'm going to talk more about like actually doing online therapy in the third segment. And I'll let Doug go.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right, okay.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, cheers.